Live from the slightly twisted deck bar, it's the Poogie Podcast with Justin Lemine.
The Poogie Podcast is proudly sponsored by Cimarron Golf Club, located in Jacksonville, Florida, off County Road 210, just west of St. John's Parkway.
Excited to have our next guest join the show. Works up in New York as an equipment manager for one of the professional sports leagues. So I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that. But some really cool stories that I'm sure he's excited to share with you all. Just some interactions maybe with players, fans, things like that. So without further ado, I want to welcome on Joe Cuomo, the equipment manager for the Brooklyn Nets.
Justin, happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being here for sure, taking some time to do this. I know I'm sure you're still busy trying to keep things in order up there through this downtime. But how's everything been with you and your role, I guess, around this whole coronavirus downtime that's happening within the league?
Well, I think we're in unprecedented times, Justin. It's kind of bizarre. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this in our lifetime. So, obviously, I like to think that my job is like a 24/7 type job. So, just kind of adapting to the current situation is, been a challenge for me. So kind of my biggest challenge has been balancing the needs of our team, but also, practicing social distancing, healthy habits, so that way we could eliminate this virus. So.
Yeah, and what was it like, I guess, the day that the news kind of broke that the NBA would be kind of halting their processes for the time being? What was that like on your end, I guess, from the frontline standpoint of working, hand in hand with the players, how you mentioned, and, some of the staff and everything?
Well, it was really interesting because we were on a long road trip on the West Coast, and we knew that going into it, into our game in San Francisco against the Warriors, that we were going to play in front of no fans. So they were the first ones to come out and say, no fans. But this was before the news broke about the Jazz and OKC game where a player tested positive. So we knew that this virus was ramping up. We were kind of in the loop with what was going on, but we were prepared to play in front of no fans. We got to San Francisco. I helped unload the luggage truck like I normally do at the hotel. Then there was nothing going on at the arena that day, fortunately. So what I like to do is I usually like to go right over to the arena and, unload all the equipment and start setting up the locker room. When I tell you, as soon as I got done setting up the locker room, I looked at my phone and I got an alert saying NBA season postponed. And I was like, whoa. So this became real. Immediately, I'm walking around the bowels of the new Chase Center and I'm on the phone on a conference call. We're going to try to get out, next day back to New York. So we're in the middle of a long West Coast trip. So never played the game, went back to the arena the next morning, took everything down and, loaded up to go back to New York. So,
but I know also on that same note, all the teams are taking the necessary precautions to make sure they are doing their very best to keep, for lack of a better term, their employees healthy, whether it's the players or the coaches, staff, front office, whoever it is. So we're definitely excited to get back to sports here soon. But a little bit more about your role. You mentioned it a little bit about the travel out to the West Coast, but kind of take me through maybe what it's like being an equipment manager in the NBA. Is it like a fraternity style, or all of you guys pretty close? And maybe some of your day-to-day responsibilities as far as getting the uniforms and the players ready for the game.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely like a fraternity. We're each team, has one of 30 in the world, right, who have this role. So we're very close knit. We rely on each other incredibly during our season travel. So it doesn't get done without the help of the host equipment manager. So day to day, you obviously probably have the preconceived notions of what an equipment manager does: laundry, ordering, outfitting. But it goes way beyond that. The position really has evolved. Being one of the more tenured members of my organization, as well as many of my counterparts with their organizations, having to be organized all the time, we have a pretty good sense of, what to do and what not to do and what flows smoothly and what doesn't. So a natural extension of equipment management has been travel logistics. So you see a lot more equipment managers becoming director of team ops and overseeing the travel. That could encompass the buses, the air charters, the food, scheduling practices on the road, with different venues. Working with hand in hand with the hotels on what the rooming lists are going to be like. So, and there's always last minute changes. So, kind of constantly got to be ready and 3 steps ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, and that's interesting you mentioned that because obviously the title of equipment manager, you think it's strictly going to come down to the equipment, the shoes, the uniforms, things like that. But thanks for kind of going into some of those other responsibilities that some people might not necessarily know actually happen. As fans, I know a lot of people show up for the games and don't necessarily know what actually goes into preparation. The preparation is much longer than the actual game itself. So it's cool that you get to kind of be a part of that and get to have this unique responsibility. What got you into being an equipment manager? How did that kind of come to be for you post college? Was this your first job? Take me through that a little bit.
So as a young freshman, I think it was my first semester at UCF, I was in a general business class, and a lot of it, the time dedicated, it was a once a week night class, and a lot of the time dedicated was bringing in different concentrations from the School of Business. And one of them was sports business management. And at the time, it was still kind of in its infancy. It was kind of like just been rolled out by the DeVos program, which at the time was only a master's program, but they were trying to come out with a minor. And I was kind of interested in that. And everyone in the classroom was encouraged to apply for enroll in classes the following year. And went and did that. Come to find out, like 2 weeks before the classes were about to start, that I was dropped out of those classes. There wasn't enough interest, which was kind of puzzling because you would think that, there's probably a lot of interest in coupling sports with business. So the following year, now that's my junior year, it comes back. I register for the classes. Unfortunately, this time I wasn't, kicked out of them. There was enough people in the class to make it going, but we were really tasked with the challenge of, spreading the word about it. And fortunately, we did a good job. We used the opportunities that were afforded to our program, through internships and volunteer opportunities to kind of build the brand and get exposure at the, within our university. And it's, grown to what it is today, over 300, I believe, maybe possibly even more. Different concentrations are starting to, adapt to it. To the interest of sports business. So, I used my internships, first of them being with the Washington Nationals, just kind of, it was a very general internship. Did everything from stadium operations to ticket sales to marketing and picking up players. It was just a very broad spring training internship. Come back the following season as the box office manager, and then stay on as an ops assistant for the minor league season. So that was about a 45-minute drive. Fortunately, now I'm in my senior year at UCF, and a lot of the classes are online. I could watch them at my own leisure at night after work. So it really was a good balance, and UCF really afforded me those opportunities to not only intern, but to also, work during the day and do my education at night. So I was very fortunate for that, being so close to the Washington National Spring Training Complex. So still didn't really have an exact focus of what I wanted to do. Like, obviously operations, it seems like everyone wants to work in operations, but, from my experience, you really, I would say about 75%, if not more, of those jobs go to former athletes. So you really kind of got to find your niche and, use the skills and knowledge of what you have and have a good self-awareness of what you're good at, what you're not good at to find what your role is and what you're suited for. So still looking for that next opportunity, but I knew I had to intern more. It wasn't the type of person I knew somebody that worked at a high level with an organization who was going to get me a job or an opportunity somewhere. So I kind of had to just find my opportunities and kind of create my own luck. So moved to New Jersey, enrolled in grad school at Seton Hall. Once again, used those connections to get internship experience and kind of just find my niche, build experience, and develop skills and just have better self-awareness of myself. Did a full year in their PR department, shirt and tie every day, no matter if it was 30 degrees outside or 90 degrees outside. You had some days where it was like extra inning, rain delay, having to go home at 2 a.m., turn around, wake up at 7 a.m. It was a grind. It was probably it really kind of set the tone for like my expectations of working in sports. Like, because baseball is it's its own animal as a sport, 162 games a year. It's so intense. So it really kind of laid the foundation for me. Then I come to another crossroads in my career where I'm like, the Mets were involved. The owners were apparently involved with Bernie Madoff and that whole Ponzi scheme. They were family friends, so the government went after them for relief for victims. They settled at like $300 million. This was probably 11 months into my tenure with the Mets, and once they settled on that figure, the whole organization started restructuring, and I knew that my days were probably limited. Like, I was part-time, so I didn't know, even if I did stay on, my growth was really halted. So I must have applied for something in marketing with the then New Jersey Nets. They were in the middle of a lockout, the NBA season, so everything was in a state of flux. But I did get a call from an HR representative who saw my resume and asked me if I was interested in doing an unpaid basketball ops internship. Growing up, basketball was probably my favorite sport to play, even though my passion was baseball, and I always thought I was going to work in baseball. But the commute was a lot shorter, and like I said, my growth with the Mets was severely halted. I was commuting probably about 3 hours a day at the time. So I said, this might be good, and I know this team that has plans to move to Brooklyn. There could be a potential opportunity. So one thing that we always learned in the minor from Doc was, you take the interview no matter what. And so, of course, took the interview, and I was blown away, really. Like, it was a very great working environment, very, very different from my previous two internships. And they let me know within like a day or two that they wanted me to come on as soon as the lockout was over. So they were very upfront and transparent, and it was great. So went to work immediately in January, and didn't really. It was kind of like more similar to my first internship with the Nationals. It was very general, but it was in basketball operations. It was a lot of grunt work. It was a lot of stocking fridges, doing laundry, rebounding during practice, but then after practice, going upstairs, changing into business casual attire, and helping out as an admin assistant with whether that be draft stuff or paperwork, just anything that basketball operations needed, really. Even if it meant going to get lunches too, right? Like, it was just part of the what it took. So that was my first real exposure with equipment management. So luckily, with the move to Brooklyn, they were looking for a specific equipment manager, not a trainer, to do that. And I really just kind of stuck around all summer, even though my internship was over. And fortunately, they saw my hard work in the transition from New Jersey to Brooklyn, all the new gear that came in, being tasked with making sure everybody got that, from players to coaches to front office. So luckily, I was afforded that position come August, and I've been there ever since. So just slowly kind of, taking on more responsibility, constantly learning to be better at my job and to serve our organization the best way possible.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks for taking us through that. I mean, obviously a very long journey for you, but a very fulfilling one, being able to be where you're at now and kind of finding your niche and being willing to wear those multiple hats to just kind of see what you were most interested in. I think that's what a lot of people sometimes don't necessarily want to do, is sacrifice some time to figure out what it is they want to do. And that's, really cool that you got that opportunity with, the Nets in New Jersey at the time. But Joe, if you could real quick, kind of take me through somewhat of a relevant topic, obviously, in the NBA world and sports in general, a little bit about Kobe Bryant passing a few months ago. Take me through kind of how that was felt on your end, as far as working within, the Brooklyn Nets organization, and how it kind of resonated throughout the whole NBA.
Oh yeah, Kobe was a generational type talent. I grew up watching him play. I remember where I was when the news broke about his passing. We were getting ready to play against the Knicks at Madison Square Garden. That game really stood out as one in my career where, I don't think the focus was on basketball that day. It was on Kobe and his loved ones. And it was a really, really somber environment, very, very, very different than what we're used to day in and day out. What I really learned from that was that, the effect that he had on so many players, like not even players that never even played against him. Like for many of these guys who are just entering the league or have been barely in the league for a few years, like this was their version of Michael Jordan, like Generation X's Michael Jordan. So, or Generation Z rather, they're Michael Jordan. So, I think that everyone tries to emulate his game. I think people watch his film so much and that, they just look at his work ethic as something to model. And I like to think that every player like kind of takes a piece of that Mamba mentality into their game, and just the world renowned effect that he's had on everybody is just incredible.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, like the effect that it had beyond just the NBA and the world of basketball, and to the extent of friends and family members of mine who maybe not even involved in sports too much, just dumbfounded by the news, really just kind of spoke to his legacy and what type of impact he did have. And I guess speaking on Kobe Bryant, I guess transitioning, what were maybe some of the cool moments that you've had with some players or some experiences that you've had within the world of sports, maybe specifically with the Brooklyn Nets?
Well, the first one that stands out in my mind is being in the locker room after we beat the Toronto Raptors. I believe it was in the 2013-14 season, first round of the playoffs. That was a very interesting year, being that we acquired Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce very early on. We signed Andre Karolinko. It was just going into that year, it was a very different feel than my first full-time season with the team. And we had high expectations. Jason Kidd was brought in as our head coach. And there was high expectations. We got out the gate really, really slow. But then after New Year's, we were one of the hottest teams in the league. So it was a very up and down season. And just being in the locker room after that game, it was kind of like you really got to enjoy the fruits of your labor. We came down to the last possession in Game 7, and Paul Pierce had a stop on Kyle Lowry, and it was just electric. And then you have those legends in the locker room, just like who had been there before, and like they're like leading the way. It was just a really cool experience just to kind of see, all the hard work and all the dedication that you put into a season just kind of culminate into something special like that. So that was probably stood in my mind as one of the first experiences that I've had that kind of feeling. And then secondly was actually last season. It was a very, very, very different season in and of its own way. Nets weren't expected to be very good. We're still a team on the rise, rebuilding. And there was a point in that season last year where we lost 8 in a row, late November into December. And we thought, we knew what kind of a team we were and the foundation that was there. And we thought that there was a chance we could make the playoffs. And then you lose 8 in a row, and you start to, wonder, like, what are we doing wrong? And you always go back to, like, what are your habits? Stick to your habits. They'll get you through the tough times. And we stuck to our habits. And after we lost those 8 in a row, we went on to win 7 in a row. So we completely turned the season around. Halfway through that season, we're on a long trip, and we lose the first 2 games of that West Coast trip, and we're in Sacramento, and we're down 26 going into the fourth quarter. Turn that game around, win by 2, and that was a really cool game to be a part of, because you just kind of saw it change right before your eyes that, hey, we're not giving up. And we took that into the end of the season, where we had to go on the road and beat Milwaukee and Indiana in a back-to-back. And I remember being in the locker room, kind of same feeling after that Indiana game when we clinched the playoff spot. And it was just, we did it based off our culture, based off sticking to our habits. And, it was real special. It was very different from my early in my career when we had won the playoff series, but it was very different because, I always like to add this anecdote when I talk to people that, like, Vegas does such a good job of predicting, like, how teams are going to finish. They're usually within like 2 or 3 games of being right, and they were off by about 12 games for us that year. It was really like we were like the true underdog of the NBA that year. And although we didn't win a playoff series, it was just such a cool team to be a part of. Like everyone in the locker room meshed. There wasn't any egos. It was just everyone got along with each other, and it really felt like a family. And really, that it just goes to show like what this management has done to turn this organization around, and in such a short time without draft picks. It's like truly remarkable, and it's probably a big. It's the reason to where we are today now with the players that we have.
And yeah, it's funny you mentioned the 8-game losing streak followed by a 7-game win streak. I think basketball might be, if it's not the most, one of the most affected sports based on momentum swings. And I think that obviously comes from maybe the crowd, obviously players just clicking with one another, like you mentioned, trusting your habits, sticking to your habits. And you go 8 games losing, 7 games winning, you kind of start believing in yourself again. And then you mentioned the 26-point turnaround in the game against Sacramento. Those types of momentum swings can kind of come out of nowhere. And that's kind of the beauty in the sport is things can come out of nowhere. Teams can come out of nowhere and just shock people if the 5 players and some of the bench players can really just put things together. So thanks for taking me through that. I guess more on an equipment side of things, do you necessarily have a say in the jersey styles or the uniform styles for the team, or is that more of a league office mandate from higher ups? Like how does that work as far as the styles and colors and things like that?
So the primary focus of the jersey and design is driven by Nike, with input from our marketing people and branding people at the Nets. I'm fortunate enough where they do involve me in that process because I feel like I have a pretty good read on how players, will view things, and ultimately they're the ones wearing it. So, I am involved in the process, and I'll give feedback here or there, but ultimately I, let the experts decide that. So yeah, I do see some pretty cool uniform designs and pretty cool concepts, that make the game really interesting. So uniforms are a big part of it. So.
Right. And all the fans love getting their hands on all those new uniforms that come out and all those new styles. And I know the NBA in recent, maybe this past decade has really kind of pushed, some different unique styles, really trying to step up the game as far as the designs and the colors. And that's, attributed to Nike and the input from all the professionals and everything. So I guess my last question for you, were you around – I know you weren't around with the Nets, but the story kind of broke maybe 4 or 5 years ago that there was a potential that the Nets were going to rename the Swamp Dragons back 90s, maybe 2000s. Can you touch base on that a little bit? Just kind of a fun story.
Yeah. So, the Swamp Dragons, there was a point in the long history of the Nets, not always so good years or successful years, but I think they may have been going through an ownership transition, but I want to say it was like early 90s. And they were possibly looking at rebranding, and where our practice facility was, until we moved into our new one in 2015, was located in East Rutherford, very close to Giant Stadium. You would, driving around that area in the office park, you'd have really tall, high grass. It's a very swampy area, the river's right there. So I think that whoever was trying to decide, how to rebrand it, came upon this Swamp Dragons concept, very similar to Vancouver Grizzlies, a la Toronto Raptors, mid-90s, very cartoonish type characters, but with vibrant colors. And it went to a vote. I think the Board of Governors had to vote for the uniform change, the team change, right? So every team has a say in that. So they took to a vote, and 29 of 30 teams approved of the switch to Swamp Dragons, except for one team, and that one team was New Jersey. They decided, I guess, last minute that they didn't want to do it. So the Swamp Dragons concept never came to be. It stuck with the Nets, the history and the tradition dating back to the ABA days for the organization. So the colors kind of changed here and there. The logo changed a little bit. It was more modernized in the late 90s into the 2000s. And then once again, rebranded and changed for our move to Brooklyn. So,
and is there any chance that we can get a Swamp Dragons uniform at some point for one game, a one-off, just to give the people what they want? Is that in the works at all?
I can't comment on that.
Oh no!
But I know I did make a couple shirts for Brooke Lopez. We just for gag gifts. We had Brooke and I. He was always the type of player who always wanted to see the logos or the new jerseys before everybody else. So he would come in the equipment room. We'd always chat about that kind of stuff. We had a real interest in that. So made a couple shirts for him. I'm pretty sure he still wears them every once in a while, even though he's on different teams. So, but yeah, hopefully we haven't seen the last of the Swamp Dragons, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. I'm not tied to any NBA fandom, so if that were to happen, I might have to pledge my allegiance to the Brooklyn Swamp Dragons if that ended up happening. We'll see. But I know the Brooklyn Nets on the court are obviously waiting for Kevin Durant to get healthy. They have Kyrie Irving currently. Obviously, things are looking up for the organization as far as talent goes. So I just want to thank you for being here and doing this, and best of luck kind of moving forward, getting back into the swing of things once this pandemic does pass. And best of luck to the team on the court, making some playoff pushes and long playoff runs here in the next few seasons. All right.
All right. Thanks, Justin, for having me.
All right. Thanks for being here, man. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Be sure to follow our show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other podcast streaming services, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel to check out unique video elements for each interview.